She got cuffed by a dirty cop in court next morning. She was his new commanding officer. "You don't belong in this section, sweetheart. Move along before I introduce you to some hardware." Deputy Marcus Beale's voice oozed contempt, his palm resting deliberately on the grip of his service weapon. Renata Cole didn't so much as blink. She kept her eyes locked on his nameplate. "You don't have the legal authority to order me anywhere," she said, her tone level, almost bored, cutting cleanly through the murmuring courtroom. "Try me," Beale spat, lunging forward with practiced aggression. He snapped a pair of cuffs around her wrists, utterly oblivious to the fact that he had just arrested the one person in the entire city he should have feared most, the incoming superintendent of police. The towering bronze doors of the Hennett County Justice Building groaned open just after 9 in the morning, the sound rolling down a corridor lined with scuffed terrazzo tile. It was a sticky Thursday in late spring, and the building smelled like burnt drip coffee, old paper, and the particular fatigue that settles into government buildings that have seen too much. In the third row of courtroom 5, beneath a faded plastic placard reading "Reserved Sworn Personnel and Counsel," sat a woman who looked like she'd wandered in by accident. Renata Cole didn't look like an attorney. She certainly didn't look like a cop. She wore a thrifted mustard yellow cardigan over a plain grey t-shirt, well-worn corduroys, and a pair of canvas sneakers gone soft at the heel. Her hair was twisted into a loose braid that had mostly come undone, and a cheap pair of drugstore reading glasses sat low on her nose. On her knee rested a spiral-bound notebook, its pages crowded with cramped handwriting. Renata was watching. She was cataloguing the failures of a system that had been left to rot. After a 16-year career running organized crime task forces for a federal agency, the governor's office had personally recruited her to take over policing in a city whose department had become a national embarrassment, lawsuits, leaked corruption files, a chief who'd resigned in disgrace. Renata had accepted, with one condition. She wanted 4 days completely unannounced, wandering the city in plain clothes, before her swearing in. She wanted to see the disease, not the photo op. She was seeing plenty of it. Her attention settled on the witness stand, where Deputy Marcus Beale sat delivering testimony with the relaxed arrogance of a man who had never once been told no. He was built like a linebacker, gone slightly soft, his uniform shirt straining at the shoulders, his answers to the public defender dripping with theatrical impatience. What caught Renata's attention wasn't his attitude, though. It was the thick gold chain-link bracelet on his wrist, a piece that, by her estimate, ran somewhere north of $11,000. On a deputy's salary, that bracelet told its own story, one that had nothing to do with overtime pay. When Beale stepped down, having just delivered testimony, Renata immediately clocked as a fabricated justification for an unlawful search. The judge called a short recess. The gallery began to empty in a low buzz of shuffled papers and quiet conversation. Beale strode up the center aisle, his boots cracking against the floor, and stopped cold when he reached the third row. His gaze dropped onto Renata. He took in the cardigan, the cheap glasses, the spiral notebook. His mouth curled. To a man like Beale, Renata wasn't a person sitting in a courtroom. She was an opportunity, something small to push against, just to feel large. "Hey," Beale barked, loud enough to make the thinning crowd turn. "Sign's right there. You blind, or just slow?" Renata set her pen down on the notebook with deliberate calm. She looked up, her face composed into something unreadable. "I'm sorry?" "The sign," Beale said, stepping in close, well past any reasonable distance. He rapped 2 knuckles against the placard. "Sworn personnel and counsel. You're neither. Get up and move to the back before I move you myself." Renata didn't budge. She studied the silver shield, clipped to his chest badge, 2207, and filed it away. "Court's in recess, deputy," she said, citing the relevant local ordinance with total fluency. "Seating restrictions don't apply during recess unless the bailiff says otherwise. And as a member of the public, I'm entitled to observe an open proceeding. I'm staying exactly where I am." Beale's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. Nobody talked to him like that, not in his courthouse. He leaned in, close enough that she caught the sour edge of chewing tobacco under his cologne. "You don't belong in this section, sweetheart," he hissed, his hand dropping onto his holster. "Move along before I introduce you to some hardware." The room went still. The handful of remaining lawyers and clerks turned to watch, already bracing for how this would end. Renata's pulse didn't change. She'd spent 16 years across a table from cartel lieutenants and crooked officials, a bully with a badge and an inferiority complex, barely registered. But she wanted to see exactly how far he'd go. This was a live diagnostic of the department she was about to inherit. "I'm not moving," she said simply. "Try me," Beale sneered. He grabbed her wrist hard, his fingers digging in, and hauled her up off the bench so roughly her notebook hit the floor. He spun her around, wrenched her arms behind her back, and ratcheted a set of departmental cuffs onto her wrists, cinching them an extra click tighter than necessary, the kind of petty cruelty that leaves no bruise a hospital would bother photographing. "You're under arrest," he announced, loud enough for the room. "For what?" Renata asked, staring straight ahead. "Failure to comply, disorderly conduct, resisting." He rattled off the standard menu of charges cops like him used to punish anyone who embarrassed them. "Let's go." The walk through the courthouse lobby was meant to humiliate. Beale kept a tight grip on her arm, steering her past clusters of gawking onlookers. Renata kept her chin level and her expression flat. Outside, the midday heat hit like a wall. Beale shoved her toward his patrol SUV, opened the rear door, and pressed his hand on top of her head not to guide her, but to force her down before slamming the door. The back seat smelled like industrial cleaner and old fear. Renata sat in the dim cage, wrists aching, and let a small, dangerous smile cross her face once Beale wasn't looking. He thought he'd put a stray in her place. He had no idea he'd just lit a fuse under his own career. The drive to the 3rd District station was reckless by design, hard turns, sudden stops, Beale chuckling up front every time she slid against the plastic divider. No seatbelt, no Miranda warning. Renata sat through it, cataloguing violations, building a mental case file with the patience of someone who'd done this for a living. The SUV rolled into the station's side lot. Beale yanked her out and marched her through a side door into booking a loud, fluorescent-lit room full of ringing phones and a row of handcuffed detainees griping on a bench. The walls were a tired shade of beige, the floor sticky underfoot. He paraded her up to the booking counter, where a heavy-set officer with a sergeant's stripes sat half asleep behind a chipped monitor. "What've we got, Beale?" Sergeant Dunmore asked, not looking up. "Live one, Sarge. Disorderly, failure to comply." Beale grinned, and resisting, she took a swing at me when I cuffed her. Renata's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Falsifying a report." "A felony." "That didn't happen," she said clearly. "There were at least 15 witnesses in that courtroom." Dunmore snorted. "Sure. Name?" "Jane Smith," Renata said. Beale grabbed her shoulder. "Give him your real name." "Or what? You'll arrest me again? File another false report?" Renata turned her head and met his eyes, and something in her stare made him take an involuntary half-step back. "I want my phone call. That's it. That's all I want right now." Dunmore waved a hand. "Put her in 3. Let her sit." Beale marched her down a narrow hallway lined with holding cells and shoved her into cell 3, 8 feet of bare concrete, a steel toilet, a metal bench. He yanked the cuffs off hard enough to leave raised red lines across her wrists. "Get comfortable," he said through the bars, slamming the door with a heavy clang. "You're going to be here a while." Renata rubbed her wrists and walked to the bars. "Deputy Beale," she called. "My phone call." He turned, smirking. "Ready to cry yet?" "My phone call. Now." He sighed, fetched a battered cordless phone, and shoved it through the slot. "Make it fast. And don't bother with a lawyer, call your bail guy." Renata dialed a number she'd memorized, not written down anywhere. It picked up on the second ring. "Voss." "Daniel, it's Renata." Mayor Daniel Voss let out a relieved laugh. "Renata, good. I was about to call you. The press is already setting up outside City Hall. Podium's up. Where are you?" "Swearing-in's in 40 minutes. "There's been a change of plans," Renata said, inspecting the wall of the cell. "I won't be making it to City Hall." Why traffic?" "No." Her voice went flat and cold. "I'm currently sitting in holding cell 3 at the 3rd District station. I was assaulted and falsely arrested by one of your deputies. Marcus Beale, badge 2207. Dead silence on the line, the particular silence of a politician realizing his department had just detonated its own credibility. "I'm coming," Voss said, his voice shaking. "I'm bringing the commissioner. Don't move." "I wasn't planning to," Renata said, and hung up. She handed the phone back through the bars, sat down on the cold bench, closed her eyes, and waited. 40 minutes later, the bullpen of the 3rd District Station was loose and easy. Beale had his boots up on a desk, sipping a giant energy drink, regaling Dunmore with an embellished version of the courtroom incident, how the crazy woman had supposedly tried to bite him when the double doors at the front of the station didn't just open. They slammed open. The room went silent instantly. Phones stopped mid-ring. Striding through the entrance with the force of a freight train was Mayor Daniel Voss, his face a furious shade of crimson. Beside him walked the police commissioner, looking faintly nauseous, and the outgoing interim chief, sweating through his collar. Behind them poured a dozen reporters with cameras and shoulder rigs. The press, the mayor had simply redirected from City Hall with 4 words. "Follow me. Now." Beale's boots hit the floor. He scrambled up, wiped crumbs from his shirt, and stepped forward with a confident grin, certain this was some kind of commendation. "Mr. Mayor," he said brightly, "if you're looking for the watch commander—" "Shut your mouth," Voss snapped, not even slowing down. He walked past Beale as though the man were a vending machine. Beale stood frozen, watching the entire procession, mayor, commissioner, chief, press pool, march straight past the booking counter toward the holding cells. "Sir, you can't go back there," Dunmore stammered, half rising. "Unsecured area, we've got—" The commissioner rounded on him. "One more word, Sergeant, and I'll have your badge before lunch." Dunmore went silent and pressed himself against the wall. Beale followed at a distance, a cold sweat creeping up the back of his neck. He watched the group stop in front of cell 3. Camera lights snapped on, flooding the dim hallway in white. Through the bars, sitting calmly on the metal bench, was the woman in the mustard cardigan. Voss gripped the bars, knuckles white, staring at the raw marks on her wrists. He closed his eyes for one long breath. "Commissioner, keys." The commissioner fumbled the master key into the lock with shaking hands. The bolt clicked. The door swung open. Renata stood, smoothed the front of her cardigan, and stepped out, not like someone who'd just been released, but like someone who'd simply allowed herself to be temporarily inconvenienced. Camera shutters fired in a steady rhythm. Beale pushed through the press pool, his face a portrait of confusion. "Mr. Mayor, sir, with respect, you can't let her out. She assaulted me. She resisted." Renata turned her head slowly. The hallway went dead quiet. Voss turned to Beale, his expression pure contempt. "Deputy Beale," he said, loud enough for every microphone in the room, "allow me to introduce you to the woman you just assaulted and locked in a cell." He gestured toward her. "This is Renata Cole, former Deputy Director of the Federal Organized Crime Task Force." He let the words land. "And as of this morning, the new superintendent of this entire police department." If a person could physically collapse from words alone, Beale would have folded into the floor. The color drained from his face. His knees buckled, forcing him to grab the bars of the next cell to stay upright. His mouth opened and closed without sound. "Chief," he finally croaked, voice cracking, I didn't know. You weren't in uniform. You didn't identify yourself." "Is that your defense?" Renata asked. Her voice had lost all softness. It was now precise, cutting, absolute. "That abuse of power is acceptable, as long as the person on the other end of it isn't wearing a badge?" She took one slow step toward him. He was taller, heavier, and in that moment, looked like a child caught mid-tantrum. "You didn't ask for identification. You ordered me out of a public space I had every right to occupy. When I cited the law, you escalated to physical force. You cuffed me with the specific intent to cause pain. Then you brought me here and had your sergeant draft a report with fabricated charges." That's a misunderstanding," Beale stammered, hands raised. "I was just doing my job." "Commissioner," Renata said, without turning her head. "Yes, Chief," the commissioner snapped to attention. "Relieve Deputy Beale of his weapon and his shield, now." "Sarge," Beale shouted down the hall, looking for an ally. Dunmore stared at the floor, refusing to meet his eyes. The commissioner stepped forward, hands trembling, and unclipped Beale's holster, then reached up and unpinned the silver shield badge 2207 from his chest. The small metallic click seemed to echo louder than anything else in the building. "Chief, please," Beale begged, his voice collapsing into something small and pathetic. "I've got 2 kids. I've got a pension. It was a misunderstanding, I swear." "A misunderstanding?" Renata's mouth twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. She reached beneath the collar of her cardigan, unclipped a small object from the strap of her tank top, a slim digital recorder, its light blinking red, and held it up for the cameras. "I was running an internal integrity sweep before I was even sworn in," she said to the press pool. "This department has a culture problem, and I needed to know exactly how deep it went." She turned back to Beale. "You just gave the district attorney a clean recording of false arrest, excessive force, and a fabricated police report." Beale's eyes went wide with horror. "You don't have a pension anymore, Mr. Beale," Renata said quietly. "You have a court date." She looked to the commissioner. "Place him under arrest. Use his own cuffs. I believe they're still sitting on the booking counter." The ratchet of metal teeth echoed down the same hallway minutes later, but this time it was Beale's wrists feeling the bite. The commissioner didn't bother leaving them loose. The walk out of the station mirrored the one from an hour earlier, except now it was Beale, being marched past a stunned bullpen, reporters shouting questions, cameras catching the tears streaking down his face. The bully had been gutted in front of everyone who used to fear him. The fallout was immediate and total. Footage of the cell block confrontation went viral within hours, becoming a national flashpoint in conversations about police accountability. The next morning, Renata Cole was formally sworn in, trading her thrifted cardigan for a crisp navy uniform, 4 silver stars catching the light on her collar. Her first act as superintendent was seismic. Using the recording and the investigation it triggered, she uncovered a kickback scheme running out of the 3rd District offices, shaking down local business owners for protection money. Sergeant Dunmore was terminated and indicted. 9 other officers tied to the scheme were suspended, pending federal charges. The district was gutted and rebuilt from the studs up. 8 months later, the case reached its conclusion. The bronze doors of the Hennett County Justice Building opened again. This time, Renata didn't sit in the gallery, she sat in the witness box, uniform pressed, posture immaculate. At the defense table sat Marcus Beale, no longer in uniform, no longer wearing his gold bracelet, dressed instead in a faded orange jumpsuit. Months in custody had hollowed him out. He looked a decade older. Superintendent Cole testified with clinical precision, no embellishment, no satisfaction in her voice, just the facts, the recording, and the documented pattern of abuse. The jury returned after 90 minutes. Guilty on every count. False imprisonment, assault under color of authority, falsifying an official record, official misconduct. The judge, the same one whose courtroom Beale had disgraced months earlier, looked down at him with open disdain. "You were given a badge to protect people who couldn't protect themselves," the judge said. "Instead, you used it to terrorize anyone who didn't bow to you. This court sentences you to 7 years, with no possibility of early release." The gavel came down. Beale dropped his face into his cuffed hands and wept as the bailiffs led him away. Renata stood, straightened her jacket, and walked out into the afternoon light. The machine had been broken for a long time. Now, piece by piece, it was being rebuilt, starting with the removal of the rot that had been allowed to spread for far too long.